Thank you, Simone, and thank you to everyone at TFAF for having us here today. As Simone mentioned, I'm Ivan Shaw. I'm the visuals editor of The World of Interiors. I'm very excited to be here with our panelists and with all of you today, and thanks so much. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're going to start at the end with Stephen Harrison, who is the director and chief curator of the Munson Museum of Art in Utica. Stephen, welcome. And Yana Mihailuka-Lefebvre, who is the director of Lefebvre Galerie from Paris. So happy to have you here. And Alyssa Kapito, who's an interior designer here in New York, correct? So we have a very distinguished panel today. We're very excited to be here. And let's start in, we're gonna dive in. Stephen, you're a historian. We're 100 years out from that famous 1925 exposition. Talk a little bit, I know you curated an exhibition called the Jazz Years about 10 years ago, which unfortunately I missed, but it sounds like it was wonderful. But tell us a little about your thoughts just 100 years out and looking back.
Well, the 1925 exposition des Art Deco was really a watershed moment. It had come after, plans for it really began after the great exposition in 1900, which had brought so many people to Paris to examine what was, that great moment of turning of centuries. And so they anticipated in 1925, another great fair, but really they had tried to get it going earlier than that. Yeah. But it was really to showcase all that was modern in design in the world and what was new about the new century. And they didn't want anything that was historically based. And so they really put calls out to, commissions in various countries to participate in this fair. And interestingly enough, America considered it, and indeed our ambassador to France at the time, Myron Herrick, really wanted America to participate, the United States to participate, but a brilliant Commerce Secretary at the time, Herbert Hoover, decided that there was nothing modern being designed in America at the time, and so the United States did not participate.
Wow.
We did not provide a pavilion at the fair, but thousands of Americans visited the fair, and that was the most important thing.
Wow. And there were pavilions from many other countries, correct?
Oh, indeed, absolutely,
right.
Yes.
And Yana, your gallery is based in Paris. Yeah. Started in 2000, you joined in 2010. What does Art Deco mean to you? I mean, how did you come to it? What does it mean to you? And what's been your experience with it? Or how did the genesis of that?
Yeah, I think Art Deco is really one of the few periods, historical periods, that is still relevant today and is still interesting to collectors, which is not the case, unfortunately, with Art Deco, or not anymore with Art Nouveau. Or 18th century classical art. People find it a little bit too ornate, too stuffy, too historical. But Art Deco kind of managed to still be relevant because of its clean lines, very pure minimalism almost in certain aspects. And we were talking earlier, it's interesting, there's almost two Art Decos. There were two parallel styles during that time. There was what we see here of Ruhlmann, very ornate, very, very luxurious. You have ebony wood, you have ivory, you have, puma fur, you have all of these crazy, luxurious, pieces. And then parallel to that, you would have a movement that was based on, socialist and communist ideas, that was in response to housing crisis after World War I, and that was much more minimal and simple with cheap, affordable materials, like, for example, metal, that we see in a lot of, artists.
Well, and
Art Deco.
And interestingly, they really are beginning. If you notice in many of the forms in Ruhlmann's pavilion at the 1925 World's Fair, which is what that image shows you, It was titled The Pavilion of a Collector. So they were imagining a collector, you know, and that was maybe the interior's stuffed with things. But they start out with 18th century forms, you know, an encoignure, a corner cabinet, or you know, a little desk. These came from 18th century models, but what Ruhlmann did, and others like him, was to strip that down to its basic components and really take away any extraneous decoration and contain the decoration that they included on there. It was still made of the finest woods and the finest ivory and sometimes gilt bronze and other things, but it was the manner in which it was made. Later, this turns into more abstract geometry, and that's really how the movement moves, the modernist movement. And going from the 20s to the 30s, it becomes a much more geometry-based.
Right. And Alyssa, I know you had an art history background, Renaissance art, and how did you get to design Art Deco? What was sort of the entree to that? Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of it?
Sure. Well, I mean, the understanding of Art Deco and that period really came from my art historian background.
Okay.
I learned about it in school from an art perspective. But from an aesthetic perspective, it's something that's so in line with what I do.
Okay.
The clean lines, you know, we were talking about actually cheaper materials like metal, but today those materials are very expensive. Like it was the first time they were using chrome, was in the Art Deco period. But also this idea that you have these minimal geometric forms and they're elevated in shagreen, parchment, ebony. I think it's something that really resonates with people today. You know, like quiet luxury is a new term. It's a new term, but this was really the birth of simplicity in very beautiful materials. And I think my work in particular is something that really focuses on clean lines. I've been told my work has a lot of geometry in it. And so I use, not only do I collect Art Deco, but I use Art Deco as often a basis point for designing a room. Like if I'm ever stuck, I'll like refer to Jean-Michel Franck and Dunand and André Tournay and all these amazing architects and designers, and I'll study their work and I'll be like, oh, this is where I need to be. They were also masters at proportion, which I don't think is spoken about enough. You know, the geometry and the simplicity is really important to what they did, but the proportion and the scale that they used was totally new. This idea that they had like these tiny little lamps on these larger, lower, this was a completely new idea. It's something that we're, of course, very familiar with now, but at the time it was novel. And also it creates this sense of these crazy proportions, which I think are very theatric, which is necessary when you use very simple forms. So it's like this balance that's really beautiful. You have these very simple forms and these very, you know, expansive proportions, which really, it makes it very dramatic in a way that's still simple. And I think has always been the most interesting for me.
Well, what you're describing is you create an entire interior, and this material is perfect with that because those designers were designing not just the furniture, as Ruhlmann's case, but also fabrics and wallpapers and chandeliers and everything, and the architecture itself in some cases.
And what I think is super interesting about...
They were creating an environment.
Well, these pavilions were full environments and they got to explore with scale. And it's really cool to look back at the pictures if you guys have time after you leave to like Google this fair. It's really, really interesting. You'll get a lot of inspiration.
Yeah, sometimes I look through, in my research, I look through old Vogue magazines or Art Decoration, and you look at these pictures of Jean-Michel Franck, who's really the best of the best, I think. And you can see it today, absolutely. He really invented, I think, the modern interior that we all aspire to today. You would have these, for example, coffee tables. didn't exist before. It was a new idea that developed around this time. And all of these beautiful layered materials, different textures. And he would do these beautiful rooms, all the same sort of beige color, but with different textures and different proportions. And they're so modern and perfect, and this is exactly what our collectors want. Ruhlmann, on the other hand, it's still beautiful, but it's more historical. It's something that is...
Well, this is where they're beginning, remember.
Yeah,
so.
I feel like it develops.
That's
His
right.
work develops
It
and
does.
it becomes very, like, that scale and proportion, like that image that some people might know here of, like, that very low bed with the
Yes,
crazy
amazing.
proportion. It looks like it's like 20-foot ceilings, but it's just like...
And there is this
Simplicity about
tension,
that.
right,
Yeah.
between traditionalists and modernists, right? And then there's the individualists, as I've read. But there's this kind of tension between creating one-offs and one-of-a-kinds for the elite, as opposed to sort of mass production, right? And that kind of goes on. And it develops. But we have a slideshow, so we're going to look at some pictures. It might be fun because. To your point, Stephen, which we talked about, the term Art Deco doesn't come up until the mid-'60s, correct? 65?
That's right, yes. An historian named Beavis Hillier coined the term in 1965 for a landmark exhibition that traveled this country in that year and really brought together like 1,000 objects that people had no idea. They had lost the sensibility of it.
Right.
So he brought it back.
What was the name of it?
Beavis Hillier.
Yeah, which is fascinating because we think of it as Art Deco, but at the time nobody was saying that, correct?
Right. No,
Nobody was using
exactly.
that term. Yeah, it seems like that's what it was.
F. Scott Fitzgerald termed the Jazz Age.
Yeah.
You know, and he's the one who really kind of linked music with design and architecture at the same time.
And your exhibition, the Jazz Years, spoke about that or spoke to that, correct?
Right, we did.
So we're going to jump in. We've got a wonderful slideshow, so I don't want to miss some of that. We have this sort of resurgence of Art Deco in the 1970s, correct? And particularly in Paris. And this is the apartment of Karl Lagerfeld, the fashion designer, which is something we can talk about too a little bit, the connection between fashion and design.
Absolutely.
But this kind of comes up again. There's this renaissance of Art Deco, fair to say, and resurgence in the 1970s. Karl had bought a lot of this furniture from a very particular apartment from Elsie de Wolfe, an apartment that Elsie de Wolfe had designed in the 30s.
was one of the best,
correct,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So let's talk about this. Is primarily Jacques Ruhlmann, correct? Yana, thoughts about the apartment or thoughts about these pieces?
Yeah, so you see, this is all tubular metal, and yet it's Art Deco forms. Also very 70s somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not Ruhlmann.
It's not Ruhlmann, no. This is from the 70s.
Sorry. I mean, we can move the screen a little bit. Can we? So,
There we go. Now I can see it.
all right. Can everybody see? All right. Yeah, I love looking at the pictures. I'm a visuals editor.
What
sorry.
you're seeing here is really, he had acquired work from the 1930s. And so here you see the influence of other areas around Europe, like the Bauhaus in Germany, for example. And
are we still
all
talking?
based on those two chairs and the high stools. That's all based on sort of geometric abstraction, you know, which you found in art at that time. But notice there's the cabinet, a commode there on the left. That's from the earlier period. That is basically an 18th century French form,
Right.
that has been updated probably by Ruhlmann.
It's in glass, though, right? Isn't it?
No, on the left.
Like it's,
No, that's
looks like it's reflecting the bed.
it's mirrored, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. But still, you know, it's still an 18th century.
Yeah. But are we
form that
talking?
has
Is this
been updated.
apartment technically Art Deco? Do we consider this Art Deco, or is it a little bit post?
It feels more Bauhausy.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll
Or
look at
70s,
More
yeah.
70s.
I
Okay.
think it's very difficult to put, exactly a precise pin on what Art Deco is and isn't.
Right.
But it's somehow appealing.
Well, I think that's important too, right? It's not necessarily a thing that's static, it's evolving, correct?
Yeah,
And-
but also a lot of the periods were influencing each other. You know, like they
Right.
weren't operating in a vacuum.
Okay. So we have Karl's place, and this is another view of the room, the bedroom, which is extruded. There are a lot of original Ruhlmann pieces.
There you get that crazy scale, which
Okay,
is
tell us
so-
about that.
it's just this there's like almost this simplicity that goes up, and the moldings that bring you up. There's shorter doors and taller ceilings and curtains that go all the way up, and the lines of the curtains go down. It's just like this
and there's
ethos that's very, very simple but very exaggerated.
And from what I've read, one of the influences is the idea of a skyscraper, correct? Which happens during that period. There's something being very tall. It's because we have elevators, right?
Sure.
So suddenly you can go up and down easily. You don't have to walk the stairs. So there is, Stephen, do you think there is this sense of verticality?
Absolutely.
In design?
The allure of the city was so important. And remember, many artists and designers came to America to see New York City and to see Chicago and to see our great skyscrapers here.
Right.
And so that was highly influential.
Yeah. And it was influential for Parisian designers because Art Deco also developed into this ocean liner style, as they would call it. And this was a period of the Normandy ocean liner, Ile-de-France, and these huge cruise ships were made to showcase French know-how, the best of the best, luxurious interiors, very tall grand salons, and these beautiful ships would go to New York and transport people between Le Havre in France and New York City, and become sort of the emblematic Art Deco, creations of the time. And you can see them, and can see this influence in interiors.
And interestingly, a little bit of a photography tact for 1 second, because I can't help. This is from a book that I worked on. These pictures were taken by Horst P. Horst, the famous photographer, came to Paris in the 30s. He actually took the Normandy to America and settled in the United States and has Jean-Michel Frank furniture from Coco Chanel's apartment in his house in Oyster Bay. So very much we're seeing this. So he was there for the original, and then he's back in the 70s photographing a lot of the furniture he might have actually seen in the 30s. And then, so we're jumping to Yves Saint Laurent. And this is, again, it's sort of a different side of Art Deco. This is Yves and Pierre Berger's place in 1971 in Paris. Apparently, Yves and Carl were competing for the best pieces. And so this is a different side, a different sort of vein of Art Deco. Alyssa, what do you think?
This is what we were talking about earlier. So firstly, in this, I think you get the Jean-Michel Frank room. You get the wood paneling, the very simple paneling, and actually Jacques Lacoste and Faux Boiseries brought a whole room here, which is incredible. If any of you guys haven't gone through the booths yet, it's the first one as you walk in, and it's whole room instrument marquetry by Jean-Michel Frank. But we were saying that you can't talk about Yves Saint Laurent without talking about Jacques Grange and what he did for resuscitating and like making the Art Deco period so chic. He was Yves Saint Laurent's interior designer at the time, and he was a Jean-Michel Frank fanatic.
Well, and what you mentioned earlier about mixing and it being so timeless, you can see in this photo.
So the walls are almost exactly a copy of a room by Jean-Michel Frank, and the furniture, the rest of the furniture is kind of mixed. Oh, and also the fireplace.
Well, the rest of the furniture is
a mirror
late
version.
60s and 70s, right? So
Jacques
Joe
Grange
Colombo.
is here, actually. Yeah, I just saw him.
He's here?
Oh, is he really?
He is.
Should we bring him in?
That would be a great find. That would be a great get.
Ask him, but he really, Jacques, really resuscitated Art Deco.
Yeah.
And he was, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think he was really kind of behind this idea of mixing Art Deco with different things, with new things. And this eclecticism was really his idea, I think, largely.
And I think it made it much more relatable.
Exactly.
Because he was mixing it, people kind of played with it. They saw it in a different way. You didn't have to fully commit to something.
Exactly.
You could take it and it could still be really chic.
And I think before we had this idea that if we do an Art Deco room, it has to be 100% Art Deco or 100% Art Nouveau or 18th century, and he made it very easy to integrate.
And that was the key to its endurance.
Exactly.
Being able to continue to look new and chic today, because you can mix it with modern pieces.
Right.
I mean, I mix it with mid-century Italian and Danish, and the ability to mix is really important. Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to jump. This is just a detail from a rug, which is quite wonderful. Maybe a little Art Nouveau influence there, Stephen? A tiny bit?
Well,
but,
I think,
yeah.
again, this is really from that earlier period when
Right.
they are looking at Vienna and they're looking at, for inspiration, everything that had just happened 25 years before. And really it was the war, the First World War, that kind of disrupted so much. And so they wanted to go back to the excesses of color and the use of contrasting colors, and all this really carries over. It's really a pre-war aesthetic that they have updated in the early 20s.
And when we talk about the Exposition, the French are kind of reasserting themselves post the war. They won the war. They want to kind of restate themselves. But we talked a little bit about the idea of exoticism, right? So there's one thing that happens in 22. Howard Carter discovers the tomb of Tutankhamun, King Tut as we know him, and that's a huge influence. And you also have the sort of African influence as well, both in design and art.
Well, people had never seen those colors that were coming out, gold and these, beautiful, rich blues and corals and all of this. And so all of this really, just struck a chord, and it was such an enormous popular event that it couldn't help but be an inspiration, right?
Yeah, and there were also lots of Japanese inspiration in Art Deco, and it started in much earlier, 19th century, but it continued. And I'm working on a piece about Art Deco lacquer, and which had major influence on Art Deco aesthetic. And you can see in both interiors, in Karl Lagerfeld's and in this slide for Yves Saint Laurent, the beautiful Jean Dunant vase there, and the smaller ones. And the colors, the classic Art Deco red and black, those were inspired by Japan and Japanese lacquer art. And everybody was collecting, finally with, French colonies, everybody was collecting African masks, and that was, I think, also influenced by Cubism.
Yeah, and we have this between the wars period, correct? And we know that the artists, designers, photographers, they're all kind of hanging out in Café Society in Paris, influencing one another. Alyssa, any thoughts about this just from a design perspective and this mixing of objects?
From the mixing of objects, the same thing I spoke about before, that the ability to do that was introduced by designers who were using Art Deco in different ways. In reference to there's a great Dunant here also. Whose booth is it? It's right above an André Saulnier.
There's a lot of Dunant lacquer in this.
It's like Di Lorenzo.
No, it wasn't Di Lorenzo. It was
Marcillac.
Yeah, it was Galerie Marcillac. I can't even say it the way you say
Marcillac.
Thank you. There's a fantastic Jean Dunant piece of art, but just mixing is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, we all have to check that out after the talk.
There's a lot to check. I could do a guided tour.
I was about to say, I think we need to do a guided tour after. Let's jump in, and Yana, I think this is for you.
Oh yes, my chairs. If you could just jump to the next slide real quick. Yeah. So this is the Tutankhamun's throne that was discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. Wow. And exceptional. And it was very, unusual to have a tomb that wasn't pillaged. So this was all completely new material. So it was shown in the Louvre finally, I think in 26 or 27. And the whole of Europe went to see it. It was a revelation for designers. And so Marc Duplantier, from the slide before, it's this, we can see a clear, direct inspiration. He did this suite of 8 dining chairs for his client, Vignon, in 1932. And, we can really pinpoint everything he's done here. These are the Egyptian chairs. Only here, of course, they're in beautiful, simple oak. Very clean lines, it's not the ornate, crazy gold. It's very, minimalist and quiet luxury.
Yeah, it's a quiet luxury theme today.
He's updated the design.
Yes, exactly.
But it is quite fascinating. An archaeological find is incredible as an inspiration for designers. I can't think of any other find like that. I mean, or something like that happening today. But it's quite extraordinary that something like that happens and designers and artists are influenced by an archaeological dig.
I've gone to the Met and gone to the Greek and Roman wing, and like there are things that definitely influenced me. But paring it down, like I think what's so interesting was that he wasn't just inspired by it. He chose to reduce it, which is like so interesting of the movement.
Yeah, museums, I think the Louvre in particular and Greek and Roman rooms there had huge influence on Art Deco. The simplicity, you know, as we see them today, or back in the day, the white, you know, of course, originally everything was painted and, you know, very bright back in ancient Greece. But, you know, today when we go to a museum, we have these beautiful columns. Everything is white, everything is quiet, but so powerful. And I think they tried to capture that essence.
Nice. All right, let's look a little bit. Alyssa, is this from you? I think this is one of you. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, this is a show house we did.
Okay.
I did years ago. And the focus was this very French Art Deco design mixed with contemporary pieces. It was in a very, very old room. The room itself had incredible scale. And it was kind of my play on how one would use Art Deco today. You know, you mix it with a steel modern table, and it feels just very of the moment.
Yeah.
You've featured a tea set by Puy-Foucault in that. And,
there were a lot of different Art Deco.
Puy-Foucault, you know, was a very, very old French silver company. And their earlier designs, I think, you know, reflected a very neoclassical taste. And so by the 1930s, they had completely changed their design aesthetic to incorporate these very geometric patterns.
Puy-Foucault is one of my favorite brands. I'm actually doing, we're reviving an Art Deco pattern currently that's really debuting in September. That's using initials, but in an Art Deco way. And Puy-Foucault is one of my favorite things to collect personally, but I'm entirely interested in the Art Deco stuff and completely uninterested in everything else.
They loved you know, I think many designers in this period began to be very taken with the idea of contrasts. And so you get red and black, lots of different colors and black. Puy-Foucault was marvelous because they used stones as handles and finials.
Like the bonbon.
So you get big chunks of crystal or you know, amethyst or something like this, but paired with a very plain silver surface, right? So again, it was this sort of major contrast in aesthetics.
Well, I also love that, like, if you have a room that has Art Deco aspects to it. This is the same room, another view of it.
Oh, that's the same room.
Yeah. I love that you need cutlery. Like, if you didn't have Puy-Foucault producing like cutlery and plates and tea sets and all that stuff, then like you'd get to dining and the whole aesthetic would, you know, not be able to be completed. So I love Puy-Foucault for like giving us flatware that's phenomenal and stuff like that.
There's a Puy-Foucault show right now in Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. I don't know if you've seen.
What's that?
Christophe. Oh, is it Christophe? Yeah, it's Christophe. Yes, you're right.
But they also have a ton in Paris of Puy-Foucault.
Yeah, they do. It's still in existence today. There was.
Well, when one company was doing something that was a success, others followed. So I mean, they all jumped on the same bandwagon.
But this is, I think, brings up an interesting point, and to my mind, Art Deco seems still so modern, right? And I'm curious, all of your thoughts. Why does it not feel old-fashioned? Why do people feel like it fits in a contemporary home? You mix it with design. You have many clients who are collecting it. You're still historicizing it. Why do we think it feels modern, so modern?
I think people live much more casually. Like the whole world has become a little bit more simplified. Things are more easily accessible. I think that it's very usable.
Is it fair to say the modernist aesthetic in Art Deco has superseded the more traditionalist, or is that
two
fair?
Things. I think the modernist aesthetic, and I think that people, I don't know that it was ever lost, but there's definitely a resurgence of quality.
Okay.
Of desiring quality in simplified forms, the row,
Right, interesting.
And by the way, fashion and interiors, I think now more than ever have become so fused together that I think that people are getting it from everywhere that they're being influenced by. But I think the simplicity and the beautiful forms are something that's really appealing. People live more casually, but yet they still want to live beautifully.
Right. Yana?
I think a lot of this flows from the art world, frankly, when minimalism begins to change all the rules for art making. And so, when you leave a beautiful apartment like this one you've designed, you go out into the world and we are bombarded by noise, by, a restaurant that's just filled with pattern everywhere and color and all of it. So when you get home, to be able to rest with things that aren't that way, that are minimal, and that they give you a sense of quiet.
Right, it's a calming.
I'm sorry?
That's your point.
Well, yes,
I think
truly.
we need to bring you up here.
But no, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's
well,
my point of view,
but that's important, right?
But
There's
I think that's one reason why people look to Art Deco to collect in a way, because those things, fit with these interiors that are more minimal.
Yeah, Yana, you're dealing. Tell us, what's it like in Paris? Your collectors, the people that come in.
No, I agree, absolutely. I think Art Deco, when it's the best of Art Deco, like our favorite Jean-Michel Franck, provide the perfect simple minimalist background, which you can layer with anything. And then it's interesting to see how there was this simple minimalist trend, what we call sort of Art Deco, and then in the 40s after the war, we see resurgence of these same historical, ornate shapes with the curves and gold and all of this that comes back that is a little bit less interesting. And then we see, when we look in an interior that is, space age 1970s, it's very identifiable. 80s, we can see it right away. But Art Deco, when it's very minimal, is just so pure and simple that it stands out from all of these periods. And I think that's why we love it so much, because we can project something of ourselves and make it very personal.
That's great. Let's go one more. Different project?
Yep, that's actually my apartment.
This is your apartment? Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
All right.
so I'm a collector as well. And there's many pieces by Jean-Michel Franck, Royer, who's a little bit later, but I'm enamored with that period. So, but you see it here being mixed with contemporary art and French ceramics, and in an apartment that has elements that are more purist, and then being mixed with things that are a bit more old world.
Oh, and Franck is an interesting case because from what I've read, it's not abundantly clear exactly what he designed or what he influenced, and that feels very modern to me, and I'm interested in your takes on that, as opposed to the 18th century artisan in a workshop with an artist's vision. We have somebody like Jean-Michel Franck who's engaging with a number of different individuals to create his work or their work. Stephen, historically, how does that speak to you? Or?
Well, it's true. These were ateliers. They were studios, and many designers were working with the master as well. And so
Jean-Michel Franck collaborated with Alberto Giacometti on
Yes.
works, and
it's the best part.
It's the best part. Yeah. It's the best of the best. It's what we have, second floor.
Okay.
And so he did other collaborations, but it's sometimes hard to know exactly what is what with him. But everything I think that Jean-Michel Franck touched, it has a very clean, sort of calm look to it.
And actually, you know how I spoke about the Jacques Lacoste room that he
Yes.
brought fully in straw marquetry. So I collect these tiny little boxes.
Okay.
My little homage to Jean-Michel Franck. Yeah, I have tons of them. I've gotten them everywhere, like from like eBay to auctions to like, you know, anyone who will sell them to me. But you could see them on the coffee table in the foreground. 3 of them. There's like 20 more.
Wow.
But I love them. This tiny little box
Okay.
that was so elevated with straw marquetry. So
And you feel like that tells the story of Art Deco in a way?
I think that's like it's just like profoundly beautiful. Like these little simple objects.
Right.
No different from the 18th century, where they had, you know,
Yes.
small bibelots, you know, with precious stones and precious metals and all of it, but just lifted and brought into the 20th century in a different way, in a different adaptation, a different style.
Nice. Yana, is there a piece that's, I mean, I hate to say a favorite piece. I hate that. Like, I hate when people say, like, what's your favorite photograph? I don't have one, but is there something that speaks to you more than anything, just in general?
You know, talking about boxes, we have these beautiful Jean Dunant boxes on our stand that are roughly the same size as these, and they were made probably around the same time, late 1920s, 1930s. And somehow, you're right, you know, sometimes you see these little boxes from, you know, 18th century and they look like, you know, junk and there's
Stuff
too
boxes.
much. Stuff boxes.
Right.
But when you see them, what we have in lacquer with eggshell inlay, they're just black with white eggshell and they look so chic and beautiful. And you just put 1 or 2 and they elevate the whole room and make
100%.
it, you know, it's that one little touch. And that's, I think, very Art Deco to me.
Yeah, a detail.
Just a small
moment.
detail.
This
Okay,
is great
also
too.
another room that I
Beautiful
designed.
Jean-Michel Franck.
Thank you, with the Jean-Michel Franck lamp. And I love, and this is talking about the mix. You know, there's the 50s genre and like this more contemporary than Art Deco, but it's all French and it all sort of, I love that you see the development of time in a room, like where you can mix a French lamp from the 40s, from the 30s, and then, you know, you can mix it with French wood pieces from French design. They actually are from India, but.
I love how you did a play on the windows with the classic Art Deco proportions too.
Yeah.
I think it makes the whole room, just a little touch, the high curtains like that.
And Stephen, I don't know if this is a fair point, would mid-century modern be considered a repudiation of Art Deco or an evolution of Art Deco? I mean, this is what happens. Is that fair to say?
Sure,
This is kind of what
that's
happens?
the aftermath.
It's a continuation of modernism.
Okay.
And all of this is a you know, these are all the progress of modernity throughout the mid-20th century.
Was Corbusier involved in the Art Deco period? Because he was very involved in this period.
Well, in the 30s, early 30s.
Yeah, so I
yes.
think like you have him,
Right.
he's the you know, the connection.
I mean, there was the Cubist pavilion that he designed just down the Seine from where the location of the 1925 World's Fair.
So Corbusier worked on these pieces with Jean Rey.
Really?
Yeah, he was the architect for these schools, these massive schools built in India where all this stuff, and Charlotte Perriand was involved in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these makers went through different periods too. They followed kind of a historical progression. For example, Aileen Gray, who is also one of the best, but she did, you know, one-off pieces that were just, you know, crazy. And Yves Saint Laurent collected some of them. So she was first in her very Art Deco style, very classic Ruhlmann, kind of Ruhlmannish, and then she went to a more you know, simple, kind of tubular steel type of style later on.
Yeah.
So I think some of them just.
Again, it was
I
think the influence of architecture and you know, ideas that were you know, really much more rational and and move toward geometry rather than earlier historical styles.
So this is a townhouse that I designed, and I love that we're showing all these images because you can talk about Art Deco, but to see how they're used in a room, I think is very interesting, and also that they're lived with. Like this is a home for a family, and they're living with pieces, Art Deco pieces. The chairs are Art Deco, and the ceiling fixture is actually, it's not Giacometti, but it's by Philippe Antoinaz, who worked under Giacometti as his protege. And so Philippe Antoinaz, he's still alive, he works out of Paris, he's phenomenal, and the nicest person. It's kind of in the manner of Giacometti. It's not really in the manner because I think as a protege, he was almost part of the movement.
Okay.
But yeah, you see like Art Deco again mixed with, Giacometti, what we were saying, the best part. Yeah. And then you have the genre in the front. I do a lot of mixing between those periods.
Yana, Stephen, thoughts? Just mixing the idea of the evolution of Art Deco.
Again, because these things are all a sort of version of minimalist design, they work well together. And I think you see that in this kind of an interior.
And do you find that, Yana, with your collectors, that they're mixing it? Or are people like, they just want Art Deco?
Yeah, collectors are mixing it. We're mixing it. A lot of our collectors, some of them would want maybe just one piece that is very, flamboyantly Art Deco, and then the rest is, much quieter. But this kind of furniture, for example, the sofa and the armchairs, they are Art Deco, but we don't even see them as such anymore because we're so used to this design, and this is what everybody has. You go into any store today, and this is what you buy. But it's interesting to remember that this is actually Art Deco design. Yeah. So it just, it's so seamless now that we don't even notice it.
100 years later, it still seems quite modern. Sorry, one more thought?
Well, just that one thing that we should note is that throughout this whole period, there was something called conservative good taste. And that meant, in this country, early American and colonial revival. And there's a reason that in the 1920s, great buildings like Tudor City were built. And there was a sort of undercurrent that was extremely traditional and really looked back constantly to historical revivals. And this material, therefore, was considered very urbane and very much the sort of the province of the cities, and so it filters into interior design, but really to understand just how avant-garde it was, you have to understand that. Just look around it in whatever towns and villages you go through, or even in a great city like New York, there was still a vast undercurrent of very traditional Gothic revival, Tudor revival, all the great suburbs around the United States are all Tudor revival from the 1920s and 30s. So,
well. One more thought. Sorry.
I was going to say that during Art Deco and Art Nouveau, so the idea was that they stop with the revivals and they create something new, because the critics, the art critics, artists, designers, everybody was aware that they keep reviving things, and that they should really come up with something a little bit more interesting and original. Exactly. And they tried to do it, and so this is what they came up with. But they were aware of it at the time.
Excellent. Please help me in thanking all three of our panelists. Thank you so much. It was terrific. I feel like we could spend another 45 minutes talking. I learned so much, and thank you all for being here. We have about 15 minutes for questions. So if anyone has thoughts, questions for any of our panelists, gentlemen.
Hi, I'm on the board of the Art Deco Society of New York, and we're always working, but especially this year, to bring attention to our Art Deco wonders, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and throughout all the 5 boroughs. I'm curious, in Paris, where it began, is the 100th anniversary a big deal? Is a lot happening? Is it part of the popular consciousness? Is Art Deco always there? Is it never there? You know what I mean? We're always working to present events and lectures and tours and elevate it. I'm just curious, in Paris, where it began, what is the perception of it, or is it just part of the ether?
You know, I found that there is more being done, maybe probably, thanks to you, in New York City than there is in Paris, unfortunately. And, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, you corrected me, did the Christophe exhibition. And I was kind of hoping that they would do something a little bit more grand, because this exhibition was so major for the city. They would build, movable walkways and fountains, and it was just, a major event, and it's it's pretty light,
exactly.
in terms of what they did. It is, yes. So we would hope so, but it's well, we're having this talk, so that's
Exactly.
that's always good. But in Paris, people just move on. They're a little, they move forward. They don't really, I think, sometimes appreciate, what they have there. Yeah.
Another question? One more, gentlemen.
Sorry, I might be a little off topic. I know this isn't Art Deco per se, but we are in this amazing room. I want to see with this distinguished panel if you had anything you'd say about this room.
Well, I'll take that one. These interiors that you see that are so very aesthetic and very, almost bizarre, really, to our eyes today, were designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany in, I think, 1881. And this was among his first experiments in interior designing. And he would then go on, of course, to develop beautiful stained glass and lamps and, very Art Nouveau glass objects and housewares. But he always maintained a sense of designing interiors, and it comes from these very early commissions. And almost at the same moment, he was asked to design interiors at the White House as well. So he could have gone in that direction of just being an interior designer, but he went more in a sort of commercial bent to because he became associated with other artists, and they were all making wonderful experiments in glass and ceramics and metalwork. But these interiors are extraordinary because they are amazing survivors of the late 19th century love of pattern and, an ensemble of design all decorated together. So, does that help answer your question? This room and the one on the end where the restaurant is, those are the two sort of most elaborate of the spaces.
Nice. Another question? Any takers? Oh, thanks, thank you.
I just need to make a comment for
Okay.
the enthusiasm of each one of you about this period. Because I've gone to many talks and they're like, and this on the other, and plus having all those lovely slides.
It helps, right?
I thought this topic might have been passé, perhaps, because, and then all of a sudden it's like this explosion of my original enthusiasm for the first go-around.
Fantastic.
And that's a very difficult thing to communicate, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
We
if
appreciate
we're
it.
enthusiastic, imagine how they were in 1925, right?
Yeah.
They must have just been over the moon with these new designs and these new ways of doing everything.
And we have our own home perpetuities.
Right. I just love that it was Herbert Hoover who made the decision, to keep us out of the 1925 World's Fair. Because P.S., we were designing lots of things that were modern in 1925.
Well, I think also it was because of the Great Depression. Like they felt like it would be.
Oh no, that's later. That's the
later?
30s. Yeah, this is 30s.
No, I know,
In
but
25, we were as rich as we could be.
But I thought that there was like a rejection of it because, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, he
Because
goes
of
on to be president in the 1930s, right?
But a very conservative gentleman. So I think to your point, Alyssa, maybe it was
exactly.
he was a very conservative guy,
Yeah.
and
Truly.
and he just didn't see it. He didn't see the importance. So he's remembered for worse offenses, unfortunately. but we have another question. Thank you.
I have always loved Art Deco for its masculine and feminine kind of dichotomy, and I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
It's masculine and feminine.
I
identities.
always feel like Art Deco, but I might be wrong, is very masculine. It projects this sort of power. It was meant to impose and impress. And when you enter the Salon de Collectionneur, our first slide, you're, taken aback. And I think that's, and a lot of early collectors, they all wanted it. The Maharaja of India had himself built a beautiful Art Deco palace. Prince of Japan had one built in Tokyo.
I just saw it.
So it does have that power. But of course, we love it too. I mean,
I think Jean-Michel Franck was like a little bit feminine.
Yes.
Like he's the only one that I feel like. Roman also a little bit feminine.
All right, well, I'm gonna just jump in because, there's the Duchesse d'Alba. There were plenty of women who were great. I mean, and Josephine Baker, and others who. So I do think that there were aspects that were feminine and masculine about these designs, but I mean that they just wanted to appeal to sophisticated tastes, and if you were a man with those tastes, then you were drawn to a certain look. If you were a woman, you'd maybe another. But so I think that there was. It's all about contrasts in this era, and I think you can see that in a way.
That was a good
So that's a
question.
very good point. Yeah.
Good point.
I never thought about it in that way.
We have time for another. We have one or two more. Anybody else? Thoughts? Here, gentlemen.
I'm sorry.
Art Nouveau in New York City.
Oh.
Where would we see Art Nouveau in New York City? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
That's a tough one.
Very little Art Nouveau really came to this country because it's an except in object form. So you do see it in Tiffany's Favril glass, for example. These sort of very iridescent, and you see it in silver, where you could imprint those patterns onto small things. You see that in America. There are a few dinnerware patterns that are Art Nouveau. There are certainly some silver patterns. So the dining table had Art Nouveau on it. But in terms of, interior design and architecture, you just don't see it like we see it in Europe at that time, where there are whole buildings that are designed that way.
Whole cities.
Exactly.
Whole neighborhoods,
Belgium, and it was another great center for that. But Vienna had its own secessionist style, which was opposed to Art Nouveau, but in fact, they were doing the same thing more or less. It's in Italy. It's all over Europe, but in this country, no, it did not filter. And I think that was mainly to do with it just didn't last very long.
Yeah, it was very short-lived.
Very short-lived.
I'm from Latvia originally, from Riga, and we have a whole neighborhood that is completely Art Nouveau. It's interesting.
Right.
And I think that maybe the reason that we don't see a lot of it here is because of how America and New York City was so connected with France in particular. Maybe there's a connection there, because it's still today, I think, there's so much love for everything French in the United States.
Also English in this country,
English, too, yes.
and it was almost it was the sort of thought of as the Liberty style, as Liberties of London, but that was as far as it went. People bought objects, but they didn't design houses and apartment buildings and things like that.
Right.
That's very observant, though. Great question.
All right. One more. Anybody? Oh, lady in the back.
Hi. You mentioned a few times the absence of the U.S. at that initial fair. I was kind of wondering if you could just speak more broadly to the development of Art Deco as an international movement, as kind of, countries in conversation with each other.
Well, one thing I would like to say is that even though we didn't have a pavilion at the fair, the United States, like I say, thousands and thousands of Americans visited the fair and were influenced in fashion and in lifestyle. And this is the period when in America social changes are happening. Women get the vote. Women are, threw away their corsets, and it was the flapper era. In literature and especially in music, when Rhapsody in Blue premieres, it premiered on a bill called An Experiment in Modern Music. And the Paul Whiteman Orchestra were all dressed in white tie and tails like a classical symphony orchestra, right?
Wow.
So it creeps in every aspect of American life, and that's because so many people went and experienced the 1925 World's Fair in Paris and came back with it.
I'm researching the Japanese reaction to this fair, and they had a pavilion which was very classic, not modern at all. And a group of delegates came, and they were going back again to the Pavillon des Collectionneurs. They were so impressed by what the French did with lacquer, because it's, of course, it's Japanese, it's Asian material, and when they saw everything that Jinan did with it on bigger scale, they couldn't believe it, and they went back to Japan and implemented it in their own way, because by that time in Japan, lacquer was completely out and just disappeared almost. So it helped revive an ancestral Japanese technique in such a strange way. So there was a lot of these influences. Also the Chinese pavilion, and then it was brought back to Asia, and all the influences of France, and so it had major influence on world design, I think, in general.
Yeah. Thoughts? Good.
No, I got to see this. I was just in Tokyo, and I went to Prince Osaka's.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you really see the influence. It's very cool if you travel around and see some of these Art Deco homes and houses. And there's a fantastic one in Tokyo by the Prince Osaka. You could still go see it, and you just see how he brought back this style. It's unbelievable.
It was a thing to do.
Yeah.
I think. If you were wealthy and you wanted something Art Deco, you
was
had
chic.
French artists come in and do something for
Yeah.
you.
I would just, as a footnote, say that lots and lots of books have been written in the last 25 years on the subject of Art Deco, on the architecture, on the lifestyles, on the materials and the objects. So just go and look and see and read, and you'll see lots of really good analyses of all the issues we've been talking about today. So,
Amazing.
Yeah.
Shall we? Thank you all. That was wonderful. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Alyssa, Yana, Stephen. That was excellent. Thank you.